Yayasan. Assalamualaikum, good morning, good afternoon. Selamat datang. Welcome back to the Hasanah Forum at the AVPN Global Conference. Hope you've all had a good lunch, a good meal, a good networking session. And to viewers watching the online live stream on the Hasanah Forum, thank you so much for still being with us. We're so happy to see you again. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in delivering meaningful impact, community members, especially those who are most affected by key decisions, ought to be positioned in the right spaces for their voices to be heard, to be incorporated as part of decision making that would affect the lives of that very community. But often there seems to be a gap. There's a lack of direct input from these communities, leading to disconnected decision making. Why is this the case, ladies and gents? And how can we listen better? And more importantly, how can we listen to learn? We hope to discuss this meaningfully at the second session of the three-part Hasanah Forum. Ladies and gents, here to dive into the dimension of people and society on listening to learn, joining us as panelists are, please welcome onto the stage, Anshu Gupta, founder of Gunj, Ganesh Moran, founder and CEO, Saura Industries, Nurul Izzah Anwar, co-chairperson, Secretariat of the Special Advisory Board to the Ministry of Finance, Aditi Malhotra, Chief Impact Officer, Yayasan Hasanah, and of course, moderator, Rajvin Pal Singh, Group CEO, BGBG Initiative, and Mareka.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Rajvin. Take it away.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Yeah, this one. Okay, lovely. We got our seats. Hi, selamat petang, selamat tengah hari, everybody. I'm Rashwin Pal Singh, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. Of course, as we know, we've got plenty of great content happening today, and I'm really glad all of you are here. We've got a fantastic panelist. We're going to make it a point to have as casual, as direct, and as fluid of a conversation we can have today. So we'll spend the first 35, 40 minutes with our panelists. We've got some pretty tough questions for them, of course, to jump into this topic. The last 20 minutes will be Q&A. It'll be through Slido. So there'll be a QR code after this. You can scan that and add your questions. If you see me on my phone, I'm not messaging, I'm checking the questions. Okay, so today's session really, just let me set the tone a little bit. As we all know, we say this quite often, right? Let's get community voices into the decision-making process. But how does this actually happen, right? There's a lot of these natural power structures that exist. If you imagine government sets the tone at the top, then you've got fund-making organizations, funders that are in between, they decide who gets the money, owners of capital or holders of capital, NGOs and SEs are in the middle, intermediaries between funders and community members are often seen as just beneficiaries. Is that right? How do we change this? And what do we need? Do we need a mindset shift? Do we need to change system and structures? How do we make community voices to be really a part of this? Now, today, joining us, we've got first Anshu. Anshu is from Gunj, needs not much introduction over here. Anshu's been a worldwide pioneer in transforming waste and surplus materials for circularity, for poverty alleviation. Now, Anshu's main work is not just what they do, it's how they do it, right? And they focus on preserving dignity through charity and through the work they do. So Anshu, thank you for being with us. We've got Puan Izzah, who also no introduction, is a well-respected and influential leader in Malaysia, served as Member of Parliament, 3 terms. Now she's co-chairing the advisory committee to the Finance Ministry, has worn many hats. Puan Izzah, civil society, social justice, also worked on a lot of poverty alleviation programs, research on multidimensional poverty, so she'll add her input from government and how to listen to the different voices. Ganesh, my fellow comrade, social entrepreneur, Saura Industries, works on rural electrification and water purification efforts, but also Ganesh wears his engineering hat, right, to solve these problems, both sides, working with funders and community. And lastly, Aditi from YH, Chief Impact Officer at Yayasan Hasanah, plays a strategic role in defining Hasanah's direction in how they work with different partners. Again, grassroots members, funders, government. So we've got a fantastic panel today, and let's jump into it right away. Anshu, Gunj does amazing work, right? And a big part of what you speak at Gunj is about giving dignity. Now, let's just take a step back. And how does Gunj even do this? Is this even something rightful for Gunj to do? And how do you make sure this is done articulately or carefully?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting. And I think to start with, to be honest, I have an objection when someone says that Gunj gives dignity to people, right? Because what we are arguing is that dignity is not something which you can give to people. Dignity is something which is a part of your soul. You are born with dignity. Whatever caste, color, community, geography, economy you're born with dignity. The society can only do two things. Either it can challenge dignity, you know, the way we treat people sometimes, or it can respect dignity. So at Gunj, I think we're just respecting dignity. And the first important part about dignity is that you accept the person as whatever that person is. You know, our set of expectations need to go down, and you have to, you know, accept the existence of that person. So the way we are operating, as you know, we deal with the second-hand goods of the society, right? And on a very simple parameter that, like the living being, the non-living thing also can finish their life cycle instead of being dumped in the premature death, and then it is dumped in the, say, landfills and all that. And that material, which worldwide has always been a charitable subject-object. And I need to add here that charity also, somewhere, charity kills dignity of people.
Okay.
Sustained charity kills dignity of people. Instant charity is okay. So that is what we are doing. We are reaching that material to the, you know, society, where society is, you know, the communities are actually decision maker in deciding what role they can play. So they make roads, they clean water bodies, they solve their own problems, and then as a reward, they receive this material, right? So I mean, that is where the dignity is taken care. That is where, because if I give something to someone, go tomorrow, say this is mine, that person will say yes, it is yours. But if that person has done something and then got it, when I go and say it is mine, this trouser is mine, this shirt is mine, whatever is mine, the person will challenge us and say that it might be yours, but I have earned it. That's where the narrative is changing.
So when you say charity spoils dignity, this is because of the way it's being done now, Anshu?
So I would say that most of the time we have all the best intentions when we do even charity. So I think it is most to do with the how part of it. You know, in many parts of the world, not only in my country, many parts of the world, when we get up from our dining table, okay, often we use a statement and say that keep it, XYZ will eat it. Okay, and this XYZ is the person who has been cooking for you. But can you imagine how you challenge the dignity in that simple process? And that is one of the reasons that whenever a disaster happens, and any country we have seen across the globe, and the kind of material which is, I would say, not given but thrown to the people who are affected by the disaster. Because somehow this me and you is inherent. I mean, I have a huge objection on the words like donor and beneficiary. Okay?
The word itself already creates this power structure. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, what we are arguing is that if I give time, I am a donor. If the community gives time in the same work, there are still beneficiaries. If I put in my skill, I am a donor. If the community is putting their skill, there are still beneficiaries. So in any case, this is a wrong language. It has to be a relationship of equals. Everyone brings whatever that person has. I mean, I don't know. I mean, today because it's a long session, but this is one exercise which we have been doing across the globe. We call someone from the crowd, and we ask that person that for the next 2-3 minutes you have to speak. You have to use the word donor and beneficiary as many times as you can. Okay? And use your hands, right? So when, and this is like across universities, across nations, you know, across all age group and all literacy groups. Everyone, when they talk, they say donor, and then they say beneficiary. Yeah. And my question is that if you put someone here, someone there, how do you really go and talk about equality? It's not inherent.
No, Anshu, thank you for kickstarting this at the core of it, right? Point is, sorry, I just shocked you there. So you play a very unique role, right? As, again, government, civil society, you're always looking at how to listen to community voices and bring it in. But I want to just put this conundrum with you, right? So also, we have the challenge where government always is looking for quick results, quicker action within 6 months, within a year. Whereas the actual process of meaningfully listening to community voices takes a longer time. How are you balancing this, and how have you been applying this in your work?
Thank you, Rashwin, and my panelists. I think to everyone here, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, Salam Malaysia Madani. It was a very thought-provoking answer from Anshu. I think it's very important sometimes as I sit here to realize what or who I represent. I was asked to represent the government, and I came because I believe in the crucial importance of the topic, which is justice-based philanthropy. But in truth, I'm somewhere in between. The latest installment, I am together with Encik Khairul Anwar, and we sit in the Secretariat under Tan Sri Hassan Marikan advising government. And I think one of the things that we are pushing for, four main areas, but the one that's relevant for today's session is on the issue of subsidies and social protection. I was really struck with what Dr. Stephen Kidd shared with us. I mean, he met us with the EPF. This is before the elections even. And I had in 2021, together with a poverty expert from University Malaya, we conducted a multidimensional poverty index study at the height of COVID in my constituency of Permatang Pau, because I felt that we assume so much from whether government or a legislator or boss's perspective, but we wanted to ask them, these households representing the lowest income group, what are the type of deprivations you feel? We settled on 9 indicators, which included in terms of how much access the children have to internet or to online. Deprivation. And it's because at the end of the day, so bring forward today, even as we speak about social protection, I think the task force is reminded that, you know, it's not about us at the top who, you know, we will never be in poverty, right? That's the thinking. And about targeting the poor. It's actually about a lifelong cycle where anyone can be vulnerable to a shock, a pandemic, something that changes your life forever. So the pursuit should be a floor to provide for safety net for everybody. Yeah, so I think that's in essence what we have to do to look at things. And I believe, you know, there's acceptance in this regard, but it's a long way to go. We have about 100 plus. We're talking about social protection assistance, yeah? 137 programs spanning 21 ministries and agencies. So it's important to kind of integrate and understand, and therein brings me back to the question I hope that we can answer together, because the government has realized its limits. You realize what happened during the pandemic, that the government could not provide 100% assistance needed to the community. How do you make sure that this limit doesn't stop you from doing what's good for people? And really, I believe when you talk about the key issue that we have to kind of grapple with, we need to understand the frontiers of possibility where the limits of government meets the possibility presented by the social and private sector. So the better we are seamlessly integrating the efforts, mapping out even the issue of social finance, right? Because giving money makes you feel good. There's enough documentation, evidence-based reports in this regard. But how do you make sure, from a government perspective, policymaker perspective, you can do this most efficiently? Take into account what the third sector can do and where they can target, and not trying to replicate but actually celebrate. And I think that goes back to the main point that Anshu brought about, which is dignifying all efforts. So that would probably be my take. Thank you.
No, thank you, Poniza. And I also really like how you mentioned about, it's often we see that, oh, this can only happen to people from underserved. But actually, it's about safety nets, because this type of mishaps or unfortunate times can happen to any of us. And when you wear that more universal lens, we understand that this is about providing safety nets for everybody across all classes of society. Ganesh, so you have this unique role, right, where you wear your engineering hat, which I'm really proud of the work Ganesh does. You are the bridge where you go on the ground, mostly rural, orang asli kampungs, you understand the water sanitation needs, power needs that they have. You look at engineering solutions, but then you need to navigate this with funders, right? And there is this gap, because what you're doing is quite experimental, it's quite engineering driven, it changes from time to time, yet with funders, you tend to have more structured ways of financing. How are you balancing the community voices and moving this up to the funders?
So I think, first of all, thank you for hearing me, and also thank you for Hasanah for having me on this panel. So I think on my side, echoing two of my fellow panelists here, I think number one is just like what the entire forum is about, listening to learn, right? And also I feel you also have to be very selective listening also, because you got to also, there's a lot of opinions out there. Everybody in Malaysia loves, or everyone loves giving opinions. It's so easy to say, hey, do this, do that, that's better, grow your business this way, but nobody is in your shoes, number one. Number two, also, you have to understand that, okay, am I solving a problem for myself? Then I'm closest to the problem, then I can relate to it really well. But if I'm solving a problem for someone else, then I got to experience it as how someone else lived. So let's take back 10 years ago where I started Saura, right? So I lived in a village, camped out, a couple of months. Then I understood what was the issue about, and then you design, okay, and ask them. So end of the day, the other problem is also you don't tend to listen to the people who wants to use this, who will benefit from the solution, right? So end of the day, every company goes out and goes to their boardroom and says, hey, I think these people in Negeri Sembilan, they don't have electricity, so I feel, maybe solar is the best solution. But then when you ask them, they say, oh, it only takes one tiang or TNB to come in and then fix it, right? So I think that's the problem, that a lot of people don't have conversations. So the people on the ground don't have conversations with the solution providers. The solution providers don't have conversation with the funders.
But you are the bridge, right?
Yep.
So like, I mean, as EC, and how are you bridging?
So what we do is we speak to them and ask them, okay, what do you think can best solve this problem for you? All right? So we ask them, we throw it back to them, and then we say, hey, how do you solve this? So they come up with a couple of ideas, then we challenge those ideas with the community. So sometimes materializing an idea with a community takes up to at least 2 months, right? So every time I go into a community, I bring all the, coffee, kapal api, coffee powder, or the biscuit Mary and all those. Okay, let's have a town hall session in the village, right? So those are the conversations you want to have. And then the moment this happens, then you go back to your funder and say, this is what they need, right? So then comes the funders on the other side. They feel, Dato' Shahira the other day was also saying that the power is at where the capital holds, where the capital is, right? So this is what happens, right? So the funders feel like, okay, I'm going to give you money, and I'm going to call you. Okay, are you free 3 o'clock next week to come and present to us? And then, so the conversation is such whereby 3 o'clock, get it? Yeah, or you don't get it, So that's the problem. So I think
fit these boxes and do it within this format.
So I think the problem is whereby you don't have a conversation, say, okay, you want to solve this problem. Let us as the funders participate to have that conversation with you, right? So everyone now has shared responsibility over solving a problem, rather than, okay, I'm giving you money, and 1 year later, you are accountable, you have to report this and that. So if you set by stone that kind of relationship, then it's very hard, because then the organization, as like myself or a lot of other organizations, tends to carry the same vibe back to the community and says, correct, I'm giving you money now.
We've got this timeline to implement.
We have, the funder said we have to do this by hook or by crook. You have to finish the project, right? Because maybe 2 years later, my board member is going to come and they're going to do something, they're going to launch or whatever, right? So that's the problem. So how do you have foundations coming down on the ground and also having conversation and say, hey, let us see how to help you as a company capacity build, number one. Number two, also how do we deploy programs with you, right? So
Okay. Yes.
Starts, 2 points build up on.
Jump in, please.
Yeah. So one is that I think again I'm talking about the language and lenses and I'll give you two examples. One is that it's this entire saying of the old days and which is valid today also, that you want to give the fish or you want people to teach the fishing. And I'm saying that somewhere it is also coming from a lot of arrogance of us, because our preconceived notion is that people don't know anything. So it's just people like us will go and do something, right? So we are not taking them as a stakeholder. The other important part is that the participation, when you talk about, the participation most important is the participation of wisdom of people. All of us, the technology is very new in our life, fine, just a few decades maybe. But we have evolved, we have grown without even that technology. Right? As I often say in India and in many forums, that by creating roti.com, you don't get roti, you don't get food by creating food.com. Right? It is the wisdom of people which bring. And I'll give you a very simple example, just to build up on Ganesh. So like we were in one of the village in central India. We went and we started talking about what all work we all need to do as a part of this cloth for work and all. So they took us down. There was a river which is only active in the monsoon, right? Otherwise, it's not a regular river. And there was a hand pump for the water. We came up and we started talking, what work shall we do? They said water. Okay, we said it's a small village and you have a proper hand pump and there is a water catchment area because it's next to the river. The answer was that you're absolutely right. It is a water catchment area, but in the monsoon the river overflows and the hand pump, the tap is not accessible. So all our theories of water catchment area, everything fails there. But the community knows because community is living with it. Then they said we need to dig a well. And we said well is a big thing. I mean I'm sure you know about the well. And we said that have we ever made any effort? They said yes, the government did 100 feet, the water was not there. It was further scary. And then the answer of those people, we said that, but how come it happened that the water is not there? And the answer was they didn't listen to us. And what was that wisdom? They actually bring a coconut, fine, all of us might find it superstitious, but the answer is that they actually bring a coconut, they roam around, at a certain place that coconut changes its position, fine, and that's where they tell you that there is water, and you do find water, okay? Yeah. Now with engineers sitting here, with scientists sitting here, we can always call it superstition. But we do not have an answer that 20 years back, when there was no technology and no machine and every village used to have a well. What was that wisdom? Yeah. You have science prove it, but if science doesn't prove it, and if it still happens, that does not mean that the community does not have wisdom and it is not happening. Thank you.
Anshu, no, this is nice that you're building on this. Questions are also open, so you all can start adding questions. You can scan the QR code, which will be on shortly, and you can start getting questions for us. Okay, let's bring you into this chat, right, Aditi? So we talk about listening, and quite often, as we were saying, listen at the very beginning, co-design the solution with community members, and then we will get a very holistic project. But let's take a moment, right, Aditi, because you are in the fund-making, the funder role. Now, there's listening at the beginning, but quite often we know that things change along the way. There's a lot of knowledge and wisdom that comes 6 months into it, even if you're an experienced project implementer, you've done this for 5 years, there is going to be things to change or to improvise. But we also know that these things are ultimately governed by legal contracts and M&E documents that we put in place. How is Hasanah listening to its community members and NGO partners when they are building projects?
Thanks, Rashwin. Yeah, I don't think we are making funder sound very pretty here, but just try and make my point. So I think the way we need to look at that is when we talk about where are we listening, there needs to be a basic question of what is it that we're all trying to do into this, right? We are all trying to, at some level, have a shared language towards, it has to be a shared vision of us, the organization implementing, us as a so-called grant maker trying to understand how best we can provide resources to be able to facilitate that intervention. And that goes back to two things. So one is, of course, you have financial resources which you can provide. But I think the way we are listening is, and the way we are, what is core to our grant making is that we are really invested in capacity development. And I think any of the Hasanah partners here would kind of back me up when we say we as an organization do not expect and are very conscious to say, yeah, we understand you are implementing this, but also tell us where do you need the help. I manage the capacity development, and I can tell you I have often reached out to partners to say, how can we meaningfully do this together? And that's where the listening is important. And listening doesn't just happen, you know, it's not just an intervention. It is a continuous journey. It has to happen together with the partner. So keeping legal contracts aside, listening has to be part of the governance structure of an organization. Okay. And I want to acknowledge our board also here, because often we've taken very exciting projects to our board, and they often ask us to say, what are you trying to do here? Why are you doing this project? And that's important because you need to learn to understand how connected you are to the community with regard to solving a problem. Do you think is it your perception of their problem, or have you deeply engaged with that? And that goes back to the other question of when we talk about legal contracts, it's all looking at what we say in terms of accountability, right? And accountability, I think, it's not what is owed to the funder. It is what the funder owes to the community, right? So when we talk about accountability, we have to say, have we engaged our communities and partners enough? When we say this is the intervention, is it really the intervention? Going back to what Ganesh was saying, have you communicated enough? Are we saying that it will be solved within this time frame? Is it realistic?
Or is it coming from them that this can be done within,
And is it really the solution that they want? Or you may think it's a problem, but they may tell you, hey, no, we don't want this in our village. Actually come, if you are here to help us, this is more important for us. So I think that's where listening deeply matters, and it has to be engagement with the community on a more long-term trajectory than, hey, this is the solution, let's try and do it together. And I think as Hasanah, we are taking the steps towards co-creating that together.
So I guess what I'm just hearing is listening and flexibility in listening, right? Listening is not a one-off thing that you do, it's throughout the process.
No, I think, so working with Hasanah, right, I mean, we applied for the grant 8 years ago and we got rejected because we were not good enough. I think that is also a good measure because, I mean, Hasanah, you know, so I was like, when I got rejected, you know what, one day I'm going to get this grant and I'm going to work so hard. So 8 years we worked, we made sure that our processes were right, due diligence. 8 years down the road, then we managed to work with them, and then suddenly we see like Hasanah is all, you know, suddenly they're on the ground with us. I say, hey guys, you guys are like too much, you are doing our job, right? Suddenly they are at the village, they're like, okay, I think you guys paid us to do some of the community work. So I think that's where, you know, it's exciting to see also that the, you know, Hasanah is taking the lead in the ecosystem of funders to also, you know, have this.
Sorry, I just wanted to chime in because I think the issue is also understanding the ecosystem and where the different stakeholders are. I remember, and I'm going to go back to the past a little, because when I first became Member of Parliament in Lembah Pantai, so a lot of issues with regards to urban poverty. And that's where you kind of understand in the ecosystem, there are going to be knowledge and finance gaps, right? Funding gaps, where people who are in most need of assistance, they don't really know how to get them. Yeah? And what we did, you know, opposition MP, we did not have access to government assistance, so we did a flow chart so that everyone who came to our office understood how to write a letter to seek delay before your unit is terminated. You know, all these things relating to local council. Similarly, how can you best utilize your local member of parliament, right? If you want to bring up issues even though sometimes I felt like a post person, a postman or postwoman. But the point is, then you can understand it is also important to always keep thinking, keep engaging, keep listening to what they are asking for. And then moving forward, when we did the multidimensional poverty index study, again, it was because Think City, I think, helped us. I organized a needs-based study for Pematang Pau because I felt before you wanted to intervene and introduce these great programs you think you're capable of, maybe you should see what does the constituency need. Yeah, and I think that's where it was most helpful. We even had, before the pandemic, open days where people voted, okay, do you want a park? Do you want, for example, a playground? What is it that you want within the confines of what we are able to provide at the state government? And I think that was important because such offering taught us how do we engage. And the third bit was one story which is quite important because we were trying to manage flooding in the constituency. And I had Hasanah Research Institute come to observe our work. So you have all these, experts and water flow, water movement in the country, and they're telling the village folks, so it's very top down. We're sitting on the top, speaking to them, and like, we know how to manage flooding in your area. And then, of course, we realized a better approach would have been first to print out in the biggest size possible what are the plan of action, whether it included, better drainage system or a sponge mechanism to absorb rain better, but provide it so they can see what are you going to do in my kampong, in my village, and of course have a round table of sorts rather than, again, the bosses at the top, and So I think they were instructive to my eventual work because you also can't fault government 100%. So what we did when we wanted the multidimensional poverty index to be adopted by government was I invited the minister then, Datuk Sri Mustafa Mohamad, to launch my paper. Because I knew I came from the opposition, but the issue of understanding deprivation is something that we all, as a nation, have to kind of target as an important mission. So, knowing enough where you place government, having that level of compromise to also listen in, I think, because sometimes you don't get it right all the time. So I thought just sharing the three experiences.
You were going to jump in, yeah.
And I think just to build on what Puan Isa was saying, I think language is important, right? What Anshu was also saying, it's not a beneficiary. What are they benefiting from essentially, right? They are people, and we are there to be able to work together in this social change together. They're not so-called to say benefiting from you. And I think that's what we're trying to, we need to consciously look at this language. And Hasanah, in that sense, when I talk to people and I say, Hasanah, these are Hasanah's grant maker, but our recipients are our partners. You will never hear anybody call anybody as a grantee. Hasanah doesn't have grantee, it has partners. And they are in this together from a partnership perspective, and also to build on what Isa was saying, I think we need to look at this together. And when we look at this together, then you will understand what you bring to the table and what I bring to the table.
Okay, so this is a great point, right? So let's build on this. So we talk about listening, and we talk about bringing all these different voices. And we know there's wisdom, there's expertise in community voices, in grassroots voices. But ultimately, let's take a moment to reflect, right? We're still part of a capitalistic society, which ultimately puts highest value on financial capital. Everything in the end comes back to valuing something in some sort of financial sense. Anju, you speak quite a lot about partnerships of equals, right? And you talk about the currencies that communities bring to the equation. Is there a way that you've seen we could value these currencies, right? We could put a value to, let's say I'm putting in 100 million and the wisdom here is X amount, because that changes the relationship.
So the problem as of now is that even now we are acting exactly the same we were acting before COVID, right?
Okay, let's hear this.
And that's an important point for all of us to remember that there was COVID, there is COVID, right? For large number of people, when people say post-COVID, even in that I always feel that post-COVID it might be for me and you because our jobs were intact, right? But a large number of people who lost their jobs, who lost their life, who who are again migrated back to the villages from where they came to do a good, to live a good life, and now they're back in that kind of thing. Their life is not same, right? I think what we all need to understand, just to build up on your question, if we see the last 3 years and we try to find out what worked and what didn't work. So the airports were closed, flights were not there, the trucks were operating, the roads were operational. The big hospitals were minting money. The small public health centers, which everyone in the world ignored, were doing the best possible jobs. Cities, number of deaths versus villages, number of deaths. Management in the cities versus management in the villages. And ultimately, if you see, we all were back to our traditional thing, all that, whatever the turmeric and all those kind of things which we have been ignoring.
Dal also was a solution.
Yeah, the amount of turmeric and all those avlas and whatnot we all ate, it's all back to that. Right? So I was very hopeful that maybe the society will change after this, because society now has seen, and society needs to understand that every single person who has food in the plate today, or a place to go in the morning for, say, school, college, office, whatever, or people who went to the hospital in the last 3 years came back, or people who didn't go to the hospital, all of us have, this is our second birth. So that is where I think it's very important for us to understand that what is working, what worked, because COVID gave us a chance to look into that, to realize that. Unfortunately, there is no conversation of that. Unfortunately, we think the life is as it is, whosoever has survived is back. And that is what we are saying, that it's important to learn from people. It's important to learn from these incidents. That, there's no harm in sitting, in silence and say that what worked for me and what didn't work for me. And then build up the next part of our life. Because the fact remains that all of us sitting in this hall, all of us who can afford to be, to come in this hall, are very, very influential people. Very, very influential people. We influence life of communities, we influence life of families, we influence life of our teams, we influence life of society. Yeah. So I think the inner awareness need to be here with us. The analysis need to be here with us to do a good job, because most of the people are unfortunately at the receiving end, because we don't make them a stakeholder, we don't make them partners.
Which goes back to language that we speak quite a lot. But also just want to ask you, Iza, so building on this, right, to make community members stakeholders, I'm trying to see if there's a way we could bring this co-creation mindset, right? Because as a member of parliament also, when you're one person, right? And the strength lies in the people that you work with. Even as NGO leaders, SE leaders, or organizations, we are small in that number, right? The value comes from our ability to mobilize people. But in mobilization, is it just really that as an activity, or can we bring this co-creation mindset where actually we are also capturing the capital, that the wisdom, the expertise, the knowledge that community members are bringing, right, into the program?
Rashwin, it's going to be a real challenge for government anywhere, because yes, we're back to business as usual, but somehow we forgot that during COVID, there's so many things that were laid bare. The problems with regards to poverty, inequality, even the reduction of services with regards to healthcare, and the lost generation in schools. So that's why we're playing catch up, essentially, right? And the government has a social agenda which was promulgated in 2003. But I think in the recent revamp and upgrade, they have to be able to quantify. We have a Malaysian Wellbeing Index, but how best does it capture, right? It now resides under the Economic Planning Unit, but how best does it capture the well-being of people? So it's important to bridge that gap, but at least there's that direction that we're taking. Now, I would probably go back to the issue of, again, when you talk about social finances, because we are all somehow contributing to the third sector. And we need to, because as I said earlier, there are going to be limits to what government can do. And it's not something that we should be defensive about. It's actually wonderful when you have different entities with innovative solutions, but how best to plug in the bigger framework. So the first rule or the first condition is, again, to utilize or to integrate existing data of aid disbursement. And I don't just mean the usual, how much money you give to plug in food for children in school, but even how much money do you contribute to the wardens in prisons, because they are dealing with rehabilitation of prisoners, 80%, 90% of which are from the poor, right? So the way we look at this investment in people's lives is not just mere CSR. I think Dr. Shahira mentioned this in her article in The Edge, right? It's not just about an arm of which that you utilize, but I mean, more so than just the simple understanding of ESG, the government also is integrating it, and the private sector is hoped to fulfill this role, right? You have all these targets, but if you really integrate and make sure it's amalgamate part of the raison d'etre on how you disburse your financing, your investment, it really goes a long way. Ganesh mentioned the time, right? Time is so precious. It's a lot easier to buy school bags for a day to celebrate school kids. It takes longer when you're actually teaching them a particular subject matter. You're celebrating a day to just listen to them or singing with them. I mean, there are many activities that we all can partake in, but I think integration of that data so we know at a single moment. I remember when we were visiting PPR in Kuala Lumpur, there's a few big shopping malls, but then again, wouldn't it be great if we could integrate the programs running by the big entities to directly affect those within their ecosystem, within their radius? So it sounds like a simple thing, but to do that matching actually takes a lot of effort. It's not just whole of government. I would say the trifecta will include the government, the private sector, and the third, which is social enterprises and NGOs. I mean,
it takes time. It takes time to facilitate collaborative partnerships and listening, right?
But then it also takes a strong ability to map it out in a very robust system. And that's what we're trying to do with GovTech, especially as you integrate in PADU. But I mentioned this because people keep saying all these buzzwords, you know, data is the new oil. Great, sounds great, right?
Your theory of change, and then everything is sorted
But
after
really, it's something like, you can start with something small. Like perhaps you can digitalize data in certain hospitals, even in Kerteh or in Terengganu. I mean, it's okay for as long as you know where you want to go to. You're clear on the mission that's at hand.
Yeah. And I think very interesting that Puanisa has brought that up, and also both of them brought back the pandemic. I actually read somewhere, and it set me thinking to say, times are urgent, we need to slow down.
Times are urgent, we need to slow down.
And that's very important for us to remember, right? Because we are just wanting to do this, give food aid, do that, but we question ourselves, till when will you do this? Is that the real solution? Do you want that? And it's not like inequality didn't exist before the pandemic. It's not like we didn't know mental health was an issue. It's not like we didn't know domestic violence was an issue. It's not like the government didn't know investing in education should be their priority. But it became a stark reality. We were reminded of this. And I think that's what we all need to do. We don't need to take the path of least resistance. That's essentially what we do. It is tough, it is an uphill task, but if you take the path of least resistance, I can tell you, no matter the capital, it will not go far. You need to be brave, you need to bring people in, co-create the solutions, and ask some very difficult questions even to yourselves as an organization, and I'm saying this as a funder, we do that. And that's important, you ask those difficult questions because those are pertinent questions, and you keep asking them to yourself, and you bring people together to imagine What is it that you want it to be? And those questions about even funders, we talk about data, etc. But I think, Vanessa, that goes back to the point that are you clear what you see as your impact? If you are clear, you will not fret about what data is needed. It comes to you, tools come to you. And I think that's very important for us to think together.
And Aditi, I think the canvas of we needs to just increase. I think that's what we are saying, that if the community also becomes a part of that we. And again, I'll come back to, so then it will be much easier. Then we don't have to run, because then it's a bigger we.
You were saying charity is unsustainable, right? In terms of...
And COVID is one of the biggest example, again, in the positive side of it. COVID response has told us that if the people work together, what magic all of us can do. I mean, the way everyone was delivering medicine, the way everyone was taking care of food. I mean, that is how the society exists, because the canvas of we was much bigger.
Okay, so I'm just building on what you just shared, right? So I'm looking at the questions, and thank you for all of us getting the questions in. So there is a few common themes I'm seeing, and the main theme coming out now is really on, yes, listening is absolutely important, but what I'm seeing here is how are we communicating this at the top, which is again board members, I guess even political leaders. What are the challenges when egos get into play is one of the questions. So this is a tough one. I'm going to let you all, being moderator, you've got that privilege of asking tough questions. Thank you. And then M&E. How does M&E play a part in this? So maybe I'll let you all start with how is it convincing the board, the leadership, navigating egos, and the role of M&E. Back to you, Aditi. Yeah, you're already up. So.
Because you talk about egos, man. Welcome to my world. I will say this, that one of the key lessons I got was speaking to one of the strong leaders in Hasanah, not the top bit. No, she's really impressive, and she said to me that one of the things she taught herself as she entered any organization was having the courage to be forgotten, because at some point it's not about making sure the world remembers your name. It's about leaving institutional memory so the great work or the good value that you have added to the organization can be carried on by the next person. So I think we try, in my team, we try to remind each other, you probably have different levels of expertise. I'm an engineer, same as you are, but I'm sure there's more brilliant economists or, innovators. But the point is we're working together, and if the ministry has to get the name and credit, whatever it takes, for as long as the policy is implemented. And I think this is an important discipline in this world where narcissism, it's an important psychological reality. Yeah? It's really permeating, whether you see in social media, whether you see in work life, whether you see in this corporate crazy rat race, right? You have to get somewhere and be known.
Even LinkedIn can be a bit of that.
Definitely. And I think that's why, of course you need to push hard, because if not, you're going to fall victim. And the ideas that work, now they must survive the onslaught of egos. But the strategy employed really has to place the mission and the outcome to the biggest beneficiaries, I don't want to use that word, sorry, the biggest recipients of the people, right? Rakyat. Rakyat. We have to have a separate pre-council next time.
On not using the word beneficiary,
yes,
which
I know. Yeah. Language. But yeah, absolutely right. But
it's so ingrained. It comes because we've seen documents. Yeah.
But the point is, I think it's an important lesson we have to kind of share with one another. Put a check on it. During the pandemic, during the lockdown, did you really care about the things you hold so dear today? And it was just about survival. So for me, reminding in any organization this institutional memory, the mission, that's what should unite you. So I say this because it's a reality. It is the reality. It is a real challenge to navigate egos. Perhaps one who succeeds at anything, really. But yes, anyway.
And a lot depends on our own conviction also, because it's a long journey, but it happens. Because I always feel that in this, whatever negativity we have and whatever we say, this is not happening, that is not happening, but ultimately it's happening. A lot of it is happening. Maybe the pace is slow, maybe the pace needs to be much faster, but there are enough people who are doing good. So even in this community of, the money giver, or the board or whatever you say, it's not that 6 people are there and you have to talk to 6 people. There are 2 good people are good enough to make
Knowing
sure that
how to
things
navigate the
are,
power
make
structures,
sure
right?
that things are moving. So many times, you know, when we talk about the problem, we talk about the problem in such a big way that we think that it is not possible, you know. So otherwise it happens. I mean, I can say that with a lot of conviction because we are in our 25th year. We are almost 1,600 people as an organization in India. And our language is completely different. I mean, imagine you collect second-hand goods from people and you say, no, this is not donation. Or every single person creates a hello here by giving second-hand material and say that I am donating it. And we are saying that no, it's not a donation, it's ultimately a discard. You are giving it because you don't need it. Rather, we need to be thankful to the people who are using our second-hand material because they are the keeper of our emotions. You know, they are the keeper of our hard-earned money. So we have been talking different language. We are saying bamboo bridge is sustainable. The funder community might not understand that bamboo bridge is also sustainable because many of them have not lived that life, right? But it's not that they are not understanding. It's taking more time.
Yeah.
Which is okay.
What Aditi was saying earlier, right? To slow down in this. You were going to add something?
No, it's just my thought is I think as you know, one is I mean, or having that conversations with your funder, number one, but also I mean, I think at end of the day is your purpose, right? Why am I doing this? End of the day it has to boil down. You know, if everyone is placed, I just believe that everyone is placed on earth for a specific role, and when your time is done, it's time for you to. So it's what your purpose. Are you there? Okay, you might be on the on the front page of a newspaper, yes. But 10 years down the road, every day the newspaper changes, right? Every day there's a new picture on it, right? So how do you understand? Number two is you also have to understand that everybody are underprivileged, right? So if you ask a person who's earning 100,000 a month, probably at a nice 30th floor in a building in KL, he'll say, I don't have happiness. But if you ask the same question to an orang asli in a village, he'll say, I'm contented, my life is amazing, I send my kids to school, I have 5 kids, I'm done, and life is amazing for me. So I think being able to acknowledge that, you are, we are also beneficiaries on certain end, right? When I see someone, when I see an orang asli, he gives me happiness, right? In return, I'm giving him, we're having how to elevate his life and all those. So as long as you come down at everyone on the same level, I think that's important. And I think as long as you understand that, what is your purpose, why am I doing this? As a funder, my job is to facilitate funds so that 100 social enterprises can go out to create impact. That's all.
Okay. We've got a few more minutes, so please keep questions coming in. Aditi, this is another one which I would put back to you, right? You get all the technical questions, of course, for your role. So MNE, as a lot of us in the room, we are either a part of the process, we are submitting reports, monitoring and evaluation reports, we're collecting data, but it's often seen as a reporting mechanism, an accountability mechanism. Can MNE be used as a listening tool? Have you been applying this, looking at this?
Given that I am technically qualified, but I can tell you the essence of MNE is that. The intent of why the discipline came about is to say the fact that it has to be a listening tool. And why we fret about it is because we don't engage enough with it. And the reason why you need to look at MNE is a cycle. So what people do is you think about design a program, report on it, that's about it.
Get disbursement.
Report about it and forget it. Funders don't grapple enough with it. Organizations, even civil society organizations, for them it's ended when they give us the final report. But we engage with them, and the point is that that last bit is the most crucial bit, because how are you using learning into your next grant cycle, into your next theory of change, into your program as an organization? So as a civil society organization, are you building on that project, or are you designing an absolutely new project which makes a lot of sense? But then comes back to the question of the fact that what essentially are we trying to monitor and evaluate? That is essentially the point, right? And that takes me back to the other question that we were saying. It needs to be a learning culture that we need to build between us and within our organizations. So unless you follow the entire cycle of M&E, you will not really truly understand the value it can bring to you as an organization and also to the communities you bring with. So data is not quantitative data. The bigger thing that I believe in is the qualitative aspect of that data.
Okay, but this is also, I mean, I would love to do a show of hands, but maybe, how many of us here have had to do M&A reports? Show of hands. Have had to do. Yeah? Okay, all of us had to do, right? And how many of us see it as a reporting mechanism? And how many see it as a listening, like a feedback-driven mechanism? Like, okay, good. So we've got half-half, right? So, because I would, quite often, it's often seen as a reporting full stop. But if you say it as a listening, it's a learning journey, right? Yeah.
You have an informed decision making. I mean, you can do that with that. That is what. And of course, it depends on the interpretation of it. How do you really, again, the language, right?
Correct, because it's the language that we're using
whatever
in this.
comes out, what do we do?
Are we encouraging people to really share failures and also like sometimes calling it halfway through that, hey, this is not going to work because certain things have changed,
I mean,
right?
You come back with the figures and then you again make a presentation and say 100,000 lives changed. That's a problem, no?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, that's what we've been questioning, that in our life, we don't change our own life. How do we say 100,000 lives change?
Within a short period of time.
Within a short period, because that's the wrong interpretation. The data is correct, but that's the wrong interpretation. You must have made some little dent in someone's life through one of your initiative, but it's not that you change 100,000 lives.
Yeah, so we don't say that. We just
know,
say we reach people, and you can reach people through diverse interventions.
Touch
right?
people,
we
reach
have to be
people.
honest
I mean,
with
it's
that,
just interpretation, but otherwise it's an informed fact, informed figure.
Okay, so we've got, let's see, any other new, so there's some really interesting questions I'll just mention also, right, about, we won't have the time to cover it today, but just to share what's being discussed in the room is, how do funders even decide what projects get funded, right? How democratic is that process? That's a question that we're seeing over here. How are we actually incorporating community voices meaningfully and not just as part of a process? So there's some really good questions, and I would, of course, we've got a few more minutes, so I'm going to give the speakers to just share your key takeaway as a result of today's quite fluid discussion. But we will be here after this, so feel free to catch any of the speakers and continue discussions. But as we go to the last couple of minutes, key takeaway from today that you've just picked up from the conversation.
I think for me, the good part is that all of us were agreeing with each other. You know, that means, so which never happens in the panels, you know, see? And we didn't rehearse for it. But I think that also shows, because we are coming from different sectors, right? Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm looking at positive part of it. We're coming from very different sectors. And if we are believing in certain things, that means the time for change has come. That's the most important part, at least what I could gather in the last.
You are sensing, like,
in the last, you know, one. And listening is very important for all of us, you know, because why I say that very simple example, that if you talk about the tsunamis and the floods, for people like us, you know, the city people, when you make decision, you talk about a wall to protect cities from the floods and all that. But if you listen to the communities will say mangrove is the solution to protect. Yeah. That is the only difference. And that is where now all of us need to go. And fortunately, we all agree on that.
Yeah. Foniza? Yeah.
You triggered me with mangrove. I wholeheartedly agree. I think at least, you know, on this point that we agree on the frontiers of possibility, where indeed the limits of government are meeting, must meet the potential of social and private enterprise. That's very important. But the second bit is always on the details. So whether government policy, but even as you detail out what's that social agenda, how do you measure the so-called KPIs as you write the M&E report? Because it's one thing writing a report, right? Feedback to make sure you're done and finished with the project, done and dusted. But how do you make sure that particular report is a learning tool for the organization or for the recipient? I think that's a challenge. So it's a huge gap between saying, wanting to do something and actually doing it. So I'm a firm believer of pilots. I know we can't pilot everything, But for me, evidence-based data, whatever we have at our disposal, it doesn't just have to be accurate. You have to treat it with a lot of compassion. So even as the government talks about making sure there's fiscal reforms, how do you make sure it's not just the economy that has a healthy well-being index, but the communities? Because oftentimes these two are not necessarily complementary. It could go against each other. So, you know, it's been great. I guess what Anshu was saying, he also wants an agent provocateur to keep things lively. But I'm glad, and I'd like to thank Yayasan and Hasanah for bringing this conversation in the hopes that we can each learn to do better, to future-proof each other's challenges.
Thank you, Poniza. Yes, big thank you for being here as well, all of us in the room today.
No, so I think both of them covered a bit. So I think, let me cover on in terms of ecosystem for the social enterprises. I think key takeaway is, you know, I think having these conversations brought to Malaysia, I think it's a huge, you know, you level up the social enterprises. Because sometimes you're within your sphere, you know, you become champions of your sphere. But when you go regional, you have regional conversations, you know, there's a lot of learnings and, you know, possible work that you can do cross collaboration. So I think the crisis that even we face is, you know, not infra or whatever, it's more of value crisis, right? You know, it's, you know, everyone is working in silo, you know, no one is coming together. So I think the biggest crisis is, you know, moral and values. So I feel, you know, having these conversations brought over here to Malaysia, number one. Number two, also, I feel, you know, having, you know, even some of the board members here to come and listen and sit down from morning, it's something that I rarely see. And then you also appreciate because it shows that, you know, everyone has the humility to also learn, right? So it doesn't mean, okay, I come for the opening speech, I give 2 words on the stage, you know, I do a gambit and then done, right? But if you are able to stay throughout, that shows how humble. So I think in terms of learning is how humble we are, and also, you know, how can we cross-learn. And also I feel for the social enterprises in Malaysia, I think, you know, sometimes even for me when I started off, you know, when we see, you know, Mat Saleh, itu pun takut sikit. Say, oh, you know, he must be better than us. You know, their social enterprises are very big, you know, and all those. Sorry. But, you know, that's where we have that, you know, inferior. But I think, you know, when I was in the US, you know, when we had conversations like with the Bezos foundations and all those, they do big stuff and they are looking for champions, local champions to spearhead stuff. So I think it's also us putting the barrier and saying, you know, I cannot move forward, right? But if we are able to say, you know, we can do the job, we are Malaysians, we are ASEAN, you know, we can cross-collaborate, we can partner with an Indonesian firm and do big stuff. So I think that's where, in terms of the ecosystem, I'm really appreciative that this conversation has been brought to Malaysia, but also where do we take this conversation forward? That will be the big thing after
Where do we go
this.
from here?
Yeah.
Like how, Aditi, you get the chance to wrap up.
Funders should never have the last word, but so be it. I think just to kind of bring to the fore, it's so glad that we were all speaking the same language, and I think that is really the essence of what we're trying to do here, right? We need to listen to each other more, we need to communicate with each other more, and not in conferences like this. In where we are, in where we do, and the work we do. And that essentially goes back to the idea that we were talking about, the learning question. It is a very important question. And if it's done earnestly, if you be brave in addressing some of those questions, some of those issues, you will go far with the kind of engagement you have with the community, with the kind of social change you are intentionally trying to drive. There has to be an intentionality to learning. It cannot be a by the way. It cannot be something that we think it would be good. It has to be made as part of your governance structures, and I completely agree with Ganesh here. The boards, the strategy, it has to be across all organizations, between partners and between us as an organization. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Okay, we've come to the end, and just my last words is I think it's so important we have this because as you will spend the next 2 days, you will see a lot of the conversation is about how are we moving capital to the most important areas that we need. But this conversation is about to who and how. So there's moving capital, but then also like how are we moving the capital into who? So let's have a great next few days at AVPN and the Hasanah Forum. Thank you for joining us, and we'll be here to have more chats with you. Thank you.
Ladies
Thank you,
and gents,
Anshu,
give it up
Poniza, Ganesh, Aditi,
to the esteemed
my
panelists.
awesome panelists. Big round of applause to everybody. Yes.
And moderator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rashbin, for moderating. Can we have everybody here for a group photo? And while that's going on, that was the last Hasanah Forum session for the day. Tomorrow we'll reconvene for the third panel session of the Hasanah Forum, where we explore the topic of people and leadership, nurturing courageous leaders, where we'll be joined by leaders including Dr. J. Satrijo Tanu Jojo, CEO, Tanato Foundation, Professor Tan Sri Dr. Jamilah Mahmud, Executive Director, Sunway Center for Planetary Health, Sunway University Malaysia, Tan Sri Abdul Wahid Omar,